Thank you, Florian. If this is too low for you, this is too high for me. So we'll need to adjust, right? Good morning, everyone. Yeah, thank you very much, IVI, for this opportunity. I just landed from Hong Kong, came from a 3-day conference there, and I took a red eye flight. So I need every energy, coming from all of you to keep me awake for the next 45, 50 minutes. And of course, thanks to my friend and classmate, Ann Wartel, who's still sleeping probably in Sweden, right? So we'll let her know that I'm very thankful for not only inviting me to this course, but also for adding climate change, right, and vaccines as a new topic in this course. I understand that probably this is the first time you're including this in the curriculum. So in the next several minutes, we're going to talk about, these interconnections between climate change and vaccines. First question: who among you have been exposed to, let's say, a lecture or a course on climate change and how it relates to human health in particular? I'm just seeing a few hands. So that, and of course, the IVA faculty is exempted. But for our learners here, it means this topic is going to be, new, but also hopefully this lecture will be very insightful and informative. So what I'm going to do in the first few slides is to do a recap of Climate Change 101, which I hope you took when you were in high school, college, right? I think many of you already have MDs and PhDs, or at least masters. But what is climate change? It's a result of the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Okay? We know that the planet Earth has what you call the greenhouse effect, which protects us from the powerful rays of the sun. But because of our emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, we're actually enhancing further that greenhouse effect. And then now, like, some say we're now in an oven. The planet Earth is becoming hotter and hotter and warmer because the sun's rays are the sun's energy are actually accumulating inside the planet. So that's just a quick recap of the what do you call this, the dynamics, right? And where are these greenhouse gases coming from? So I will not belabor you with the details of these pie charts, but you can see the major sectors of society: industry, energy, transport, waste. That those are the sectors that are producing various greenhouse gases. And I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about carbon dioxide, but it's just one of the several greenhouse gases. You can see the others at the bottom. So we really need to address these sectors if we want to curb our emissions, stabilize the global climate system, and ensure the long-term survival of humanity and all life forms on Earth. But this is what is happening already, not just what is going to happen. In some places, many of these impacts are already being experienced. Our ecosystems are changing from our terrestrial ecosystems, more droughts, wildfires, and then all the way to our marine water ecosystems. Corals are being damaged because water is warming. The rising sea levels are beginning to flood, inundate many low-lying islands and coastal communities across the world. So, these are all the effects of climate change. And, the effects are wide-ranging. They vary depending on your location on planet Earth, but nonetheless, no one is immune, right? Everyone is experiencing some impact due to the climate crisis. And then ultimately, what happens to the environment, the alterations in the ecological systems will then eventually affect society, the economy, our food systems, livelihood, even workers' productivity. When outdoor workers are exposed to extreme heat, then it affects not only their body but also their productivity, their ability to continue doing what they have to do in the workplace, among others. So these are the effects or the impacts on society, the economy, and of course, it affects ultimately human health, public health, our collective health. But this is what's happening now, right? We know that we need to curb our emissions. We need to address the sectors that are producing the greenhouse gas emissions. And countries have been promising, in all these climate negotiations. This November, the world's governments will gather again in Brazil for the 30th time. It's called COP30, right? So for 30 years, we've been negotiating about how to survive and how to fix this warming planet. And yes, countries are making pledges, but as you can see in this, series of line graphs, the pledges are not enough. They are not enough to really, reduce the emissions dramatically and ultimately prevent the, breaching of the thresholds when it comes to global average temperature increase. So if you remember the Paris Agreement, sounds familiar, it says there that we cannot go beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase by 2030. Otherwise, the Pacific Islands actually will be inundated, even erased from the face of the earth. Is there anyone from the Pacific in the room? We have colleagues, and I know that I'm sure you can tell later the effects of climate change already being experienced in the many islands of the Pacific. So this is what's happening, and we need to really, hold our governments accountable, the multinational corporations, global governance, to honor their commitments and to dramatically decarbonize and reduce the emissions for the whole planet. And this is the other sad thing. According to scientists, this was published 2 months ago, only 2 years left of world's carbon budget to meet 1.5 degrees Celsius target, which is the target in the Paris Agreement. Sadly, there's no vaccine for climate change. The ultimate antidote or cure is to stop our addiction to fossil fuels and to unsustainable lifestyles that produce all these greenhouse gases that eventually destabilize the climate system. So these are the deadlines, right? These are the deadlines and the dead ends that we need to overcome and that we need to deal with. So done with the climate change 101. Now I'm going to link it to human health because I believe all of us here work in the health sector. Maybe some from the animal health sector. I'm just curious. We have one hand. I think you're also the other one, the one who took a climate and health program, right? So he's been raising his hands multiple times. Climate change affects human health. I already said it a while ago. And as you can see in this diagram, climate change affects health in many different ways. There are multiple arrows, many boxes, okay? Whether it's through the storms or the droughts or the flooding or the heat wave, again, depending on where you are, right? I come from the Philippines, so the major climate hazard is typhoons and floods. But for example, I wonder if we have colleagues here from the Middle East or in more arid and those who live in more arid environments where, for example, drought, right, or massive heat waves are the major climate hazard. Nonetheless, all of these will modify, alter the social and the environmental determinants of health, the boxes in the middle, and ultimately they will affect every arena, every area of human health. So I always say, there's no single disease group that is going to be immune to climate change. And not only infectious diseases, which I understand is the focus of this course, but even non-communicable diseases, cardiorespiratory diseases, for instance, nutrition, even the Lancet report, commission report on climate and health said, we are expecting 50 years of gains in nutrition to be reversed if climate change is not going to be averted. And climate change also affects the health of our brains and our hearts. It's a mental and an emotional health issue. So there's this new phenomenon called climate or eco-anxiety. Have you heard about that? Okay. Who's feeling climate anxious? Worried about the future, and especially the young people. They are concerned about their future survival. They're not even interested in procreating anymore. They're worried that their future babies will be, not surviving, right, in a warming planet, in a planet that has temperature increase beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. So again, every arena of health will be affected, and therefore, every health professional, every clinical specialty, I always say to the hospitals, every department has a role to play in climate action, in protecting health against climate change. And so, in these bar graphs, you will see that the impacts of climate change on human health have already been projected. This is from the World Economic Forum. Billions of dollars will be lost, trillions of dollars will be lost from the economy because of additional spending due to hospitalizations, healthcare expenses resulting from climate-related diseases, and of course, ultimately, deaths, millions of lives going to be lost in the coming decades if climate change is going to worsen. So that's the first message. Climate change affects health in many different ways, and it will have a huge, effect and impact in the coming years and decades. The second message is that climate change also will widen existing and persistent health inequities. So we know that, as of the moment, health is unevenly or unequally distributed across the world within and between countries. And climate change as a threat multiplier is going to widen further those existing inequities. As you can see in this series of maps, the parts of the world that will be bearing the brunt, that will be suffering the consequences of climate change are, the same regions where there's a high burden of disease, low health system capacity, perhaps even lower vaccine coverage, right? So this is the pattern, and this is going to continue and even be exacerbated when climate change continues to worsen. Diarrheal diseases, you can see there, malaria, undernutrition, heat-related illnesses. Which parts of the world will be most affected? Africa, large swaths of Asia, and sadly the Pacific, too small to be magnified in this map, if not erased from the face of the earth, again due to sea level rise. The third message is that climate change also disrupts health systems. It will disturb, it will affect the way we deliver healthcare, our health services, our health workforce. They're not only going to be overburdened to respond, but also they will be victims themselves. And then here, I'm just giving this as an illustration. Even our health infrastructure, there was a 2023 report that revealed 1 in 12 hospitals in the world not ready for climate change, at risk of being totally or at least partially shut down if a cyclone, an intense flooding hits, a particular, community and hits that particular hospital. A lot of those hospitals are actually in South Asia, Southeast Asia. So this region, right, is home to many hospitals that are far from being prepared, right, and stable and resilient. So, and this is just the infrastructure. We're not yet talking about the workforce, the supply chains, and many other ingredients of the healthcare system. And then we also need to remember that, yes, climate change affects health. It affects our health systems, but we also affect the climate. The health sector is also an emitting sector. We are not excused, right? We are using electricity. We use plastic. We produce waste. We consume food and serve food to our patients and staff, all of which are also emitting or contributing to carbon emissions. So here, I just want to introduce to you a typology of greenhouse gas emissions. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. When you say Scope 1, these are emissions that are generated within the health facility, okay, inside the building. And one of the most popular examples in healthcare is anesthetic gases. I suppose there's no anesthesiologist in this room of vaccine enthusiasts. uh, but there are anesthetic gases that are more climate disruptive, right? The name is desflurane. So anesthesiologists are now trying to avoid that. The second type is scope 2, emissions coming from the electricity grid. We plug our device, we use the electricity that is generated from a coal-fired power plant, and that coal plant emitted carbon that also needs to be counted as our carbon emissions, okay? And then scope 3, all the emissions coming from the supplies that we purchase, that we consume, the supply chains, the food, the vaccines that we procure and dispense, the pharmaceuticals, even our travel. So all of these are scope 3. We didn't generate it inside, but because we use the product, and that product has undergone a long process to reach, the health facility, from extraction of that metal or that production of, like, let's say, plastic, all the way to, patient care. All the carbon emitted throughout that long pipeline also will be and must be calculated as our contribution to the emission. So scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, there are many sources of carbon emissions within the health sector. And so, given the 4 messages that I gave to you, climate affects health, it widens inequities, it disrupts health systems, and we disrupt the climate in return, what do we need to do? In climate science and in climate action, there are 2 main actions that need to be done: mitigation and adaptation. Familiar terms? Okay? When we mitigate, we prevent, we reduce our emissions, we cut our emissions. When we adapt, it means we prepare, we try to respond to the effects, we minimize the impact. And here in this Venn diagram, you will see the different societal actions that need to be done in order to mitigate and or to adapt. And as you can see, there are things that are in the overlap, right? There are things that are both mitigation and adaptation measures. And in healthcare, there are many things that are actually at the intersection. Later on, we will elaborate on some of them. So now, this next segment of my talk will really dig deeper into the intersection between climate change and infectious diseases. I imagine in some of your earlier lectures, climate change probably has been already mentioned as a driver of infectious disease emergence. And as you can see in this diagram, and maybe I'll simplify it, we'll give you copies of the slides, right? So, and all the references are there. In summary, climate change is going to disrupt or affect the epidemiological triad: the pathogen, the bacteria, the virus, the environment in which these microbes do thrive, and the host, meaning the human body, but also even animals that harbor these infections. And at the bottom, you will see that climate change is going to increase the frequency and vulnerability to established infectious diseases that are so familiar to us. We've been trying to eliminate them, eradicate them, prevent and control them. And climate change is going to be a driver for their resurgence and increase. On the other hand, climate change is also going to drive the emergence of new infectious diseases, the future COVIDs that we don't know yet, lurking in the wild and just waiting to jump from animals to human populations, zoonotic infections, for example. So, and here, in this paper, it was in detail more explained or elaborated how infectious diseases are being driven by climate change, or infectious disease spread are driven by climate change. So one, climatic hazards bring pathogens closer to people. The pathogens become more clingy to people because of climate change. For example, vectors and wildlife changing their behavior and moving closer to human populations. Another is when climate hazards bring people closer to the pathogens. For example, when people are forcibly displaced by floods and then they come closer to, for example, the rodents that harbor, the spirochetes for leptospirosis, etc. The third one is when pathogens are strengthened by climatic hazards. And what are the characteristics that are strengthened? Either their ability to reproduce, they have faster life cycle, increased biting rates of vectors, or even the viral replication. And then the fourth one is when people are impaired by the climate hazard. So for example, heat exposure and malnutrition leading to weakened immunocompetence, or their immune response is weaker, therefore more susceptible to infections, acquiring infections. So these are the four major pathways linking climate change and infectious diseases, again, affecting the epidemiological triad. And there's this study, actually that same study, that looked at the entire evidence. Okay, what are these microbes, these pathogenic diseases that are aggravated by climate change? So you can go to that reference, and basically they found out more than 50% of the known pathogens are actually climate sensitive. This one is actually from colleagues from IVI, this paper. And here, this is narrower, climate-sensitive diseases that are amenable to vaccines. So that earlier one includes other pathogens that we don't have vaccines for. But these ones are the ones that we have vaccines for, or some being under development. So I'll not go into the details of the bullets. You'll get copies of these. But again, it's a wide array of microbes that we're dealing with. And just to illustrate, you were just talking about dengue when I entered, and dengue is now spreading and even appearing in places where they used to be not existing, not endemic. And climate change is identified as one of the drivers of this expansion of the geographical spread or coverage of dengue, even in some parts of Europe, even in other states in the United States, for instance. And then and that's an example of a familiar disease, right, that climate change is exacerbating. Meanwhile, as I mentioned also, climate change is also going to drive the emergence of unknown infectious diseases. So for instance, this 2022 paper mapped out the parts of the world where a climate-sensitive pandemic-causing pathogen may emerge. And as you can see, the pinker or the brighter the color of that region is, the higher the chance that it will be the ground zero of a climate-sensitive disease outbreak. And that's our part of the world, Asia. So I just summarized to you, or described to you the interconnections between climate change and infectious diseases. And in this same paper by IVI colleagues, they identified vaccines, of course, is part of the climate solution. And I think we need to say it more and more, right? And I think it's an extra argument for enhancing, vaccine coverage, right? And vaccine uptake. It's not only good for health, it's actually a protection against future climate-related infectious diseases. And there's actually an article saying vaccine innovation is a critical response to the climate crisis, and the next section will talk about what are these innovations, right, in terms of adaptation, which we described a while ago as being more prepared for the impacts, but also mitigation, making sure that our vaccines are not contributing to the climate crisis. So let's first dig deeper into adaptation, right? Another term that you'll often hear is resilience. Okay? Resilience, like the bamboo, it bends without breaking. We want a health system to be the last system standing when climate-related disasters strike. And actually, from this WHO framework, it shows to you that when the health system faces a climate shock, like a cyclone, an intense flooding, or a climate stress, like growing undernutrition burden, the health system does not collapse, but instead recovers and recovers better than before, and even better if it transforms into something, again, more adaptive to the changes that are happening around it and to it. So, how can we ensure that there is resilience, right, when it comes to our, vaccines? We first need to know what are the pathways to that make vaccines less resilient. Okay? So first, climate hazards can destroy the vaccine itself, right? Through high temperatures, humidity. It got flooded, right? The entire vaccine stock was flooded because the whole health facility was underwater. So that is the first one, right? The vaccines themselves can be directly affected by the climate hazards. But climate hazards also can destroy the infrastructure that is needed for vaccine delivery, the health facility, the storage facility, the electricity grid, which is needed so that the refrigerator is open 24/7, the factory that produces it. So infrastructure, we need to make sure they're also resilient to the climate hazards as well. But also, climate hazards may reduce the overall supply from the very source, whether because there's an increased demand, other places are experiencing more climate-related infectious disease outbreak, therefore they're probably ordering more of the vaccines, which then will mean less supply for other places, or reduce production, again, because the factory, for example, was inundated or destroyed by a cyclone. But also, we need to look at the health workers who are administering the vaccines, the ones that are distributing, and not only the health workers, in fact, everyone involved in the vaccine enterprise, right? Those who are transporting the vaccines, those who are working in the factory, and of course, ultimately, those who are in charge of the care of the patients. And then also climate hazards can change communities' behavior. So we cannot only look at the supply side, but also the demand side. The people who are receiving the vaccines, but also should be demanding and wanting the vaccines because, maybe due to climate change, they'll be ill, they'll have injuries, they'll be displaced, and vaccines may be less of a priority, right, for people who are experiencing trauma, right, or just trying to get by after a terrible storm, or even hesitancy, vaccine hesitancy due to misinformation. So again, we need to look at all these different ingredients or components if we want the vaccines a system to be climate resilient. And this is a framework from the WHO of a climate resilient health systems that I think can be applied specifically to vaccine systems, right? Are you familiar with the 6 building blocks of the health system? Okay? Governance, health workers, supplies, financing, information systems, and what am I forgetting? Sorry? The services, right? So all 6 were actually elaborated by the WHO into these 10 climate resilient components of a health system. So I think none has applied this framework yet to vaccines, right? That would be a very good paper to write, but also something that we can do, right, in real life, not just in an article. So this is one framework that can be very useful if you want to start thinking about making your vaccine operations climate resilient in your countries. And then these are more concrete things that we can do. Okay, so for example, when it comes to governance, right, it's about policies. It's about making sure that they are vaccines are a priority for government. And one way to do that is to ensure that vaccines are also included in the country's national adaptation plans. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change requires countries to have a NAP, a National Adaptation Plan. But what did we find out when we reviewed the NAPs of the world? Only 27.4% of countries mentioned vaccines or immunization in their NAPs, in their National Adaptation Plans. 24 out of 124. I'm showing to you an example from my country, the Philippines National Adaptation Plan, which I had the privilege of co-drafting the health section, and we explicitly mentioned vaccines in the health chapter. So maybe my assignment to all of you, I'm like a teacher in the classroom, right? Is to look at the NAP of your country and check if vaccines are mentioned, included as a public health adaptation tool. Another is we need to really invest in surveillance for climate sensitive infectious diseases. And I want to introduce another phrase, climate services for health. Okay? Climate services are climate information, knowledge, tools, systems, and this time we're using it for the purpose of health protection, public health. And specifically, how do we use these tools to better map, to better track, to better project infectious disease spread, which can then help us make better decisions when it comes to vaccine procurement, vaccine prioritization, vaccine campaign delivery, implementation, among others. And this will require us being more familiar to different kinds of climate data, climate information, and also working with climatologists, meteorologists, and other colleagues who come from the climate and environmental sector. And then, I already alluded to this a while ago, right? That vaccine systems are also vulnerable to climate impacts, typhoons, floods, etc. So, for example, this case study in Nigeria, they look at vaccine storage and cold chain logistics. And what are the challenges? Increasing temperature, constrained cold chain performance, resulting in equipment deterioration or damage. Okay? So even the equipment themselves are not immune to heat and climate. Solar-powered refrigerators in most cold stores are inefficient due to interrupted solar energy supply. So very interesting because solar power is green energy, but actually it's still not fully reliable. So we need to really think about green energy that's also sustainable and reliable. And usually the answer is it has to be a mix. Okay? There's solar, but there's also wind energy perhaps, or hydroelectric, etc., as long as it's not coal that we're burning to emit more carbon. The vaccine distribution mechanism is mostly interrupted by difficult transportation systems caused by unpredictable weather changes. So even the transport, right, needs to be examined and ensured that they cannot succumb to extreme events. Policies are needed for prompt equipment replacement, continuous worker training, and improved monitoring and surveillance systems. So, how do we mitigate these problems? Because, we need to, strengthen the vaccine supply chain systems in the midst of all these climate changes that are going to happen moving forward as a result of our inability to curb emissions. So that is adaptation and resilience, okay? That first segment. Now I'll pivot to mitigation, environmental sustainability, greening, decarbonization. And as you can see here, 50% of the emissions in the health sector are coming from the supply chain. So that's where the vaccines, right, that we use will be included or counted under. But also the vaccines, when they're delivered to patients, they're happening inside the clinic, a health facility. And so we need to also look at, for example, the patient care settings. And so I think what I'm encouraging you all is when you think about decarbonization and mitigation, don't just think about the vaccine itself. think about the entire setting, the infrastructure, which is connected to the grid. And the health workers, they come and go, they use transport systems. So really looking at the entire system and not just at a single product. So there are many frameworks that have been proposed or that have been, promoted to educate and apply environmental sustainability in healthcare. One of which is the Global Green and Healthy Hospitals Agenda. As you can see, there are 10 pillars of a green hospital. How do we address waste management, energy consumption, the design of the building, the food that we serve to our patients and staff, the way we procure our commodities. But as you can see, what's the first one listed? Leadership. Because there should be buy-in from the top. Our leaders, the hospital CEO, the C-suite, they all must be embracing environmental sustainability, and the rest will follow. And the workforce, all the departments will follow. So there has to be, policies at the top of the healthcare institution, of the factory of the vaccine, for instance, that there is a commitment to embed environmental sustainability in all aspects of healthcare operations. This report that we co-published a few years ago attempted to answer the question, because I'm sure you're familiar with universal health coverage. Countries are still trying to achieve it. They're still on the road to achieving universal healthcare for their citizens. And the more we expand healthcare, the more we make we make it accessible, affordable to people, increase its quality, the more the more emissions we will be emitting. But here we're showing that it's possible for UHC, universal healthcare, to still be green if we will do these 7 actions. When it comes to energy, when it comes to waste management, when it comes to procurement, and many others. So if you're more interested in the details, you can take a look at this report. And then this other report that we also co-wrote with the World Bank, it's about how do we embed, climate smart or low carbon healthcare even in the pandemic response. If you remember COVID, I hope you still remember COVID, right? Because people are already are having amnesia about the pandemic that was not too long ago, right? And here we were saying that we could have actually used the pandemic to also, change the health sector to become greener and more sustainable. Okay? I hope we will not wait for the next pandemic to practice and to rehearse, right? And to experiment. But as you can see here, even the way we produce and deploy the vaccines, that is another opportunity to embed environmental sustainability. So this is the section on vaccines, and here we listed some of the things that can be done in the vaccine supply chain, in the vaccine campaigns, to make them more both low carbon but also resilient, not and resistant to shocks. Like there's again calamities due to climate change. This is an interesting report from Unitaid, where they look at 10 illustrative healthcare products, and they examine their greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm showing this to you because they did not include a vaccine. So I hope this is something we can explore, right? Like really calculate the emissions from our most commonly used vaccines, from the way their production all the way to their deployment, and then see and find ways how to reduce the emissions of that entire life cycle. There are some efforts now to promote even green vaccine procurement. More specifically, this is from the Economist Impact, just published a few months ago. As you can see, there's, what they're saying is, yes, we will still prioritize acceptability, affordability, availability, high quality, but we're now adding sustainability as a criterion for vaccine procurement. And we need to look at, again, the entire vaccine supply chain. These are the different phases from production all the way to waste. And I'll just show the next slide with all the actions, the solutions. So I'm invited to take a look at this report. It's like 100 pages, which just tells you that there are many solutions already for greening the way, the vaccine system, right? The way we procure, etc. There's even this kind of a rubric that is used by UNICEF and PAHO in terms of vaccine procurement, and they're starting to also add, green indicators. Anyone who works for WHO, UNICEF, or any UN agency here? Okay, so maybe you're familiar, or maybe not. And then I mentioned about the procurers, us, many of the hospitals, providers, what we need to do. But the suppliers are also trying to do their part, right? And here you will see, for example, major pharmaceutical companies and other manufacturers coming together to promote environmental sustainability in the healthcare sector. This is an interesting paper showing pharma companies making commitments to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Okay? By 2050, they'll reduce by this amount. By 2040, they'll do this, do that. And for the different scopes, as you can see scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And then the next slide from the same paper shows some progress, right? There are reductions that are already achieved by some of the major pharma companies and some of them vaccine producing. So I'm going to wrap up now. We need climate smart health systems. I'm introducing another term, climate smart, which is the convergence between resilience and sustainability, between adaptation and mitigation. So we don't need to choose one over the other. We can actually find ways to achieve both, making sure vaccines are green but also resilient. And that framework needs to be applied to vaccines as well. And then this is my other assignment to you. The World Health Organization a few years ago launched this Alliance for Transformative Action on Climate and Health. Next week, we actually have a meeting in Singapore. And ATTACH is a global network of nations, of governments, of ministries of health that made a commitment to establish national health systems that are low carbon and climate resilient. So my question is your country attached to ATTACH? Okay? Look at the map. And if it's not green, then you have to go to your Ministry of Health and tell them you need to attach. You need to make a commitment, right? And maybe the vaccine program, the immunization program can be a good start. So some concrete next steps, this is what I'm going to leave to you, include vaccines in the NAPs, but also recognize climate change in the national immunization programs, identify climate-sensitive and vaccine-preventable infectious diseases for inclusion in your programs, using climate information tools for surveillance, for prioritizing hotspots, accelerate vaccine coverage and sustain progress. A well-vaccinated population is a climate-adaptive population. That means we need to fight vaccine hesitancy. Prioritize research and innovation for climate-sensitive diseases. So countries now are developing, climate and health research agendas. We need to make sure vaccines are included. Educate the communities because they are the ones that will be vaccinated, and they need to understand it's part of climate coping and adaptation. Ensure that there's adequate health workforce, but also that they are equipped with climate and health knowledge. We need to strengthen the vaccine supply chain resilience while at the same time embedding environmental sustainability. And finally, we need to support and call for society-wide reduction of greenhouse gases. Because, even if we keep on jabbing people with vaccines, right? But if the economic system continues to emit exorbitant amounts of carbon, then we will remain to be on the road to long-term climate breakdown. So together, let's advance the health of people and planet with green and resilient vaccines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Renzo. This was great. I think we can have a whole week of discussions around this. I think we are at time, but we can maybe have one or two quick questions, if there are any.
Not difficult.
Shitten. From the most climate green country in the world?
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor, for your wonderful presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So my query is like till last year, till last day, till yesterday, I'm sorry, we were discussing about the manufacturing of the new vaccines, combating the vaccine preventable diseases, and about the combination of vaccines. It was more towards the innovation that is required in this century. But now today's whole presentation is about how to integrate the sustainability while also ensuring adequate vaccine production, accessibility and equity. So it sounds so robust. And in case if you are really able to implement this, and I cannot imagine a better future than that. But it also sounds quite challenging. So while integrating this climate sensitivity in the current manufacturing capacity or the production that we are doing, do you foresee any challenges in the vaccine production? Because the current climate issues that we are facing is not a result of 1 year. It took decades to reach to where we are, the challenges we are discussing. But now for the solutions also, it might take another few years. So do you think while also integrating these solutions into our current practices, it will impact the current innovations that we have been discussing till yesterday? Thank you.
Yeah. I didn't hear what you talked about yesterday.
It was
Just kidding.
mostly about this
Innovation,
and
right?
all, like
I guess, and I mean, I think thinking about incorporating green into vaccines is innovation in itself, right? So it's not necessarily, innovation and sustainability aren't necessarily like contradictory, right? Of course, as you already alluded to, it presents new challenges, which is exciting, right? An area for creativity and imagination. But we already have some of the solutions also. I think what's lacking is concrete examples, right? And concrete implementation of many of the ideas that we already know. So, but the pharma companies are starting. Some major procurers and purchasers are also starting. The attached community are beginning to also pilot some initiatives. So I think we're at the start. The challenge is to sustain the momentum as well.
Good. One quick one from the back of the audience.
Thank you very much for a very detailed and very explicit presentation. It's not a question, it's just an observation or comment. So, as you mentioned, National Adaptation Plan and attach, vaccine should be part of that. But when it comes to immunization program, when countries are developing national immunization strategy for 5 years, we look forward to the immunization agenda 2030 as a holy grail. But sorry to say, but the guidance is not there for the climate change and vaccine to come explicitly into the plan.
Yep.
So our recommendation to be considered that immunization agenda 2030 is the holy grail. It should come into that plan so that country can take it forward. Thank you.
I agree. And maybe IVI can take the lead, right? Anything else? I think.
Great.
Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much.
much.
Thank you.